Good evening, everyone, joining from wherever everyone is joining in. And glad you all could join us. Today, we have with us Mr. Prakash, CEO of Navatech Group and spearhead in construction technology domain. And we have been connected via C-Tribe. For those who don't know what C-Tribe is a construction technology community focused on building and enabling construction tech ecosystem in India. So awesome. So Prakash, why don't you take it off? I would like to, for the community to know more about yourself and what you do. What's your journey been so far? I know you personally, but I know a lot of people would be very interested to know about your journey in specific.
No, first of all, thank you for inviting me and appreciate everyone on the call joining. So I'm a civil engineer by background. I was born and brought up in the UK, graduated as a civil engineer. I have a master's in civil engineering. Went to work with the biggest construction company in the UK they're called a firm called Balfour Beatty. I'm really lucky from the very early stages of my career getting exposed to construction technologies like building information modeling. We were one of the first people to utilize iPads on site when the first version of the iPad came out. So I'm showing my age now, and and being part of a large corporation gave me the chance to start working on a diversity of projects, and so got to see the different problem sets that existed, and very quickly see how antiquated some of the processes and systems were that we were using, and very how undigitalized the industry was. And I think I joined the industry really, really fortunately at a time where there was this realization that we do need to use technological tools to help improve some of the issues that we have in the industry. And then I had an opportunity to go and work in India. So I spent 6 months in Delhi trying to help
Oh,
Balfour Beatty set themselves up there. So I lived and worked there for 6 months. That was a great experience. Really humbling, actually. And even though I'm from Indian descent, my parents are from Gujarat. My perception of India and Indians in general was one that was a kind of forced upon us through British media, right? And one of low quality, unskilled, and I guess bordering on racism, right? But I went there, and I feel ashamed that I was surprised at how mature the people were, right? And how articulate and advanced some of the thinking was when I was working in Delhi, and so that was a fantastic experience. At the time, Balfour Beatty, like kind of global regional breakdown meant that India and the Middle East was part of one division and one region. And I must have impressed somebody in the region, and they offered me a role in. And he actually gave me a choice. He says, "You can be based in Delhi, Doha, or Dubai." And I picked Dubai, and that was 12 and a half years ago or so. So I moved to Dubai, worked for a division of Balfour Beatty here called Dutco Balfour Beatty at the time. And then since kind of moved to work on the consulting side of the business. So I worked for AECOM, another large construction
yeah.
conglomerate, global one this time, and worked on the project management division and the design management division. Then moved to JLL, worked on the project management consultancy side of JLL. They're predominantly known as a real estate consultant. And then during the time between, working at AECOM and JLL, came up with this idea of using AI to help improve safety and improve safety outcomes. This was a time before ChatGPT, before AI was cool, right? This was about 6 years ago. I had this idea, and then 2.5 years ago, quit the corporate world to then go and run Navatech full time. And so yeah, it's been a fun journey, and really exciting.
Very interesting. Coming from grounds up, basically, working with one of the largest construction companies, coming to India, touching base, setting up an organization, and then moving to Dubai, and then starting something of your own. That's pretty amazing. I think this industry and this technology domain in construction requires people who have come ground up and creates a lot of impact of what we need to solve. So just entering into the conversation. So can you walk us through the journey, of the Middle East construction tech space that you see today, and what drew you? You said you moved from Delhi to Dubai, and you chose Dubai. So what drew you to the Middle East market? Was it the fancy, flamboyant projects or something else?
Absolutely. So I always say like Dubai is like the Hollywood of construction, right? What
Yeah.
Hollywood is to filmmaking, Dubai is to construction. And when I moved here 12, 13 years ago, this place had such great ambitions, right? They wanted to build the tallest, the deepest, the widest, and they kind of drive the drive and the energy of this place. I visited when I was younger, the place, and I always had this thought about it would be great to come and work here. And when the opportunity presented itself, I couldn't turn it down. And so I think that's the biggest draw, right? And then obviously there's a whole bunch of other benefits that come with working in this part of the world,
Mhm.
from your compensation. But the primary driver for me was definitely being able to be part of some of these large scale programs and iconic projects.
Mhm. So so these iconic projects? I mean, we all know, we all have been very fascinated by the Neom, for example, or the at the early stages Burj Khalifa and so on. So I'm very interested to know, what are the key drivers that you see that is pushing Middle East to take up construction tech? Is it only these flamboyant projects, or is there something else that is pushing the Middle Eastern market to adopt digital technologies and construction tech?
So obviously, the scale of some of these projects have a bearing, right? The scale of some of these projects mean that the budgets are available to be able to experiment and do things, and sometimes even create categories within themselves. But I think particularly, and this is particularly true in Saudi Arabia at the moment, is they're going through so much transformation. There's a social transformation, there's an infrastructure transformation. And so the digital transformation is just another one in the mix, right? And so they're so used to change that a change in the way that you do something in construction is not, there's no resistance to it because there's so much other change happening. And so what we're finding, particularly in Saudi Arabia, is the resistance to change, the wanting to adopt new things and find new ways of doing things is much less, even more so than the UAE, right? The
Mhm.
UAE has matured through some of these giga projects, the big projects that they've done, and I
Yeah.
think they're starting to suffer from some of the incumbency biases that you have in more mature markets, right? Like in Europe and that, where you kind of say, we've been doing this for 20 years, or we've been doing this for 25 years, we know what we're doing, or we've got this really specific problem set. So if you've got a technology that solves this, we're interested. If it's anything else, we're good, right? It's that type of that I think with that type of mentality. And then I think the other big driver in this part of the world is also productivity. Everyone seems to think that labor is abundant and so productivity should be high. So production is high, but productivity is not, right? So we get a lot of production done, lots of things happen, but they happen by flooding sites with people, right? It's not uncommon to be on construction sites where you've got three, four, five, even 10,000 workers on this site or people working on a site.
Yeah.
And the other part of it, I think, is regulatory, right? We're in a unique position in the Middle East where the governments are the biggest clients, or even if they're private-based companies, there's a lot of government influence in those private companies, and so you can get this regulatory framework and environment that helps drive certain things that are key to the government and digital transformation, digital tools, and now AI is a big thing on the government's agenda. And because they have so much control over what happens in the market, it helps drive that forward.
Mhm. Very interesting. I think, I mean, this is a common trend you see, right? When the government steps in with the framework and
Yeah,
policies in that direction, that's when it picks up. I mean, private players do their stuff, but when the government kicks in, then the entire
yeah,
ecosystem starts shifting. I think that's similar things are happening in India, of course, at a slower pace, but they are happening. We are seeing BIM policies, frameworks come into conversation, digital transformation in, some of
yeah.
these larger projects that are there, Gati Shakti and so on. So very interesting. So you mentioned, or you touched upon, Europe as a market, Middle East as a market. So I'd like to understand from your experience, what are the key differences you're seeing in all these three or four larger chunk of markets, if I may call them, for example, USA and, the
Yeah.
European market, the Middle East, and if you have experience with the Southeast Asia or in the Indian market also, that will be very good to know.
So if I first start with what are the similarities, right? Everyone seems to think that that there's that everything's different, but it's not, right? There's lots of similarities. I think even and this was a realization that I came to when we were first doing BIM adoption when I joined ACOM, and I was talking to some of our colleagues. ACOM's a global company, and so when I talked to colleagues in the UK and some of them from the US, and told them some of the things that we were doing with BIM, and the same thing happened with when I was at JLL. Actually, what we realized was that we were ahead here in the Middle East. That there was we were doing some really advanced things,
Mm,
particularly with with 4D modeling and with taking models into handover and asset management.
mm,
None of our other colleagues in some of these more mature markets had even looked at it or thought about how to do these things. And we were not only thinking about it, we were actually doing it and delivering it for our clients. And so I think there are so the struggles with understanding, getting the resources, and putting the management layer and the governance layer over some of these technologies. I think that's ubiquitous. That exists regardless of the maturity of the markets. I think that's an industry wide kind of similarity that exists. Then there's the external factors that I think that drive the differences. So we spoke about this just now, but we got this very top-down kind of approach in the Middle East, right? The rulers and the leadership have a centralized kind of command and control, and as soon as they say something, it has to get delivered, type of thing. That mentality, that attitude permeates through the way businesses are set up, right? So the head of an organization or a developer will say that this is how I want it, and then everybody goes and then does what's asked of it. Whereas I think in other parts, particularly in Europe, where I know about, decisions take a long time to be made, right? They kind of it's almost it's decision death by committee, right? Where you got to go and ask everyone else's opinion, make sure everyone's got consensus, and then you move forward. That also stifles the speed at which things happen, right? Let's look at HS2 and that happening in the UK and some of these things. They've taken so long in the planning phase, and once they get into construction phase, there's a whole bunch of other objections and things that can be put in place that increases the costs and slows down progression. We don't really have those types of issues here in the Middle East, and I think India's probably somewhere in between. I don't know the Indian market that well, but I assume that it's probably somewhere in between that. And then
mm.
you've got that, and again we touched on the labor economics, right? I think the access to abundant migrant labor from Southeast Asia, and a lot of that labor wants to come here because of the higher unit cost of labor that they get compared to their home countries. That really kind of helps drive things forward, right? We get lots of production because we've got this access to this abundant labor force.
Yeah, yeah. But when you talk about productivity and you talk about labor, so are you seeing technology adoption in this specific space of enabling labor to do more, or is it you're seeing more of replacement of technology, where technology takes in the driver's seat, and you are seeing that the amount of manual labor is reducing, which brings up productivity? Just
So
to
I
kind of
think
get some of your points.
So I think any technology, right? And there's this big debate about AI now replacing entire, swathes or departments of people. Any technology should be seen as something to augment human capital, right? It should be seen as something that's going to help you do something more efficiently, more effectively, more safely, right? Or make some improvements. We shouldn't really be looking at how we can replace people with technology. And we talking about some of the differences. We've got a big difference with Europe where they can't attract enough labor into the construction industry. And so that drives a different set of dynamics, right? I think I saw Fabio on the call. I know Fundamental is really looking at automation and robotics, particularly
Mm,
in Europe, America, and some of these markets, because their technology is not taking anyone's job. Nobody wants that job, right? People, they can't find people to do some of these
right.
jobs, so technology has to take over. I guess in India and here in the Middle East, we don't quite have that problem yet. And so our problems to solve is how do we get safe productivity out
Mm,
of the labor force that we're employing here. And so we are seeing technologies that are helping the labor force to do things safely, the product that we've developed, but we're also starting to see wearables that measure heat stress and things like that. We're starting to see, hard hats that, track the position of people so that we can see whether they're in the right place and they've got the right credentials. And so, yeah, we're starting to see some of those. I think it's probably going to be a while before we see some of the productivity robots that we're seeing in other mature markets and making an impact here, just simply because of the economics.
Yeah, and just to kind of give a context on Indian market, so it's a bit of an irony, but there are some of the larger builders, they are facing some kind of skill shortage, is what I'll say, rather than labor shortage, and
Yeah,
that's where they are also getting attracted towards some kind of automation that is there. I was speaking to a large contractor the other day, and the
yeah,
two areas that they are interested in is material research and automation. That's all.
mm,
Because
yeah.
automation, they're saying that I have masons, but when I need quality finish for my quality products, I'm not being able to deliver that. So that's my limitation. So that's a
Mm.
very unique perspective, even though we have that kind of labor availability, but the skill set is declining because of the interest in other spaces that are there.
Yeah, we have the same issue. We have a skills issue here as well, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, often you get a whole cohort of people from the Indian subcontinent who the day before they might have been working on a farm or on a fishing boat, and the next day they find themselves on a construction site in the middle of the desert. And making sure that they understand the risks of the work they're going to do, that's important. Making sure that they've got the skills to be able to deliver that work at the quality required is a huge challenge, right? And
Mm.
again, I think there's a space for technology to work with these people rather than displace them, right? So technology can be used to upskill them rather than look at technology to completely like diminish them or get rid of them.
Yeah, yeah, makes sense. So getting a little more deeper into the adoption journey of digital technology in construction, especially in the Middle East market, how deep do you think the digital technologies have penetrated? Because is it only the large guys, the large players who have adopted digital technologies? And by that I don't mean only robotics, even the smaller digital tools of managing data in a central location and so on. So what's your observation of how deep has the technology penetrated, and is there an opportunity, for example, for these the smaller subs or the smaller players to actually who are still looking for such technology adoptions across their construction life cycle?
So I think, look, it's if we broadly, and I'm going to be really generalistic, right? If you say you got large scale projects, medium scale projects, and small scale projects, small scale being refurbishment of individual houses and things like that, and the mid scale, you might be building one building or two buildings or things like that, and the large
Small
scale
adoptions.
is entire developments, right, or high rise buildings. The large scale projects, I think, are baseline digitized, right? So they've all got document management systems. They're using ERP systems and procurement systems that are mostly digitized. A lot of them are using iPads and things like that to do inspections and things like that. Almost everybody on those sites has got a mobile phone, barring some of the maybe like frontline labor workers, but most of them are now starting to get it as well, right? So from that kind of scale of project, I
Mhm.
think the basic digitalization is there. Those
Mhm.
projects almost always, even just to get permits, they have to have BIM models. So you've got at
Okay.
least rudimentary three
Yeah.
dimensional models, and then things are kind of built on top of those. And then a lot of them are now moving towards, dynamic dashboards. So Power BI is becoming almost the standard, or the equivalents, Tableau and things like that, is almost becoming the standard way of reporting progress and things like that on those big scale projects. Now, the mid tier, mid scale is a mixed bag. It kind of any of those that has had exposure to the large scale projects, obviously through kind of osmosis, they kind of pick these things up,
Yeah.
and it's starting to penetrate into that area. And it's obviously not as advanced as there, but a lot of them you are still seeing them using document management tools, using digital procurement tools, using at the very least, using mobile phones to communicate with people, and also it kind of depends on what your definition of digitalization is, right? But I think people using WhatsApp on a
Yeah.
construction site to communicate things is a level of digitization, right? They're not pen and paper, they're not
Correct.
doing things on posting cards and getting manual signatures. The least digitized, probably it's probably not even touched, is the small scale, right? And I guess this is a challenge everywhere. I like if
Yeah.
you're even if I go to the UK, like my family comes from a construction background, and I talk to some of my dad's friends and things like that who are running construction businesses on a small scale. There's zero, almost zero digitization there, apart from the mobile phone.
Mm. Interesting. I think that's a similar thing that you can draw across all landscapes, give or take. Even in India, for example, the top players, they have a lot of these systems already in place. The middle tier is something that is still, as you said, it's osmosis kind of a scenario where they are adopting, they're getting used to, they're learning about these technologies, they're learning about BIM, they're learning about, digital document management systems and all that stuff. And the lower rank is definitely not really keen on that right now. They are always extinguishing fires and executing their projects. That's all they care about. So now, taking it more towards the market availability or market opportunities. So for a startup, a small or a medium scale startup or a large scale startup for that matter, eyeing Middle East, what would be the right way or the ideal way to enter that market? And where do you see like broad opportunities lying where even our community fellows who are building products, world-class products, they can access that market? What's the typical ideal market entry looking like for them?
you you have to put boots on the ground. I haven't worked in the UK or in India for a long time, so I don't know if it's still the same there. But if you're talking about here, the Middle East, both UAE and KSA, you
Mhm.
have to have people on the ground. You have to have people who understand context and the nuances of this place, and build relationships, and go and meet people face to face. That is massively valued here. The other part of it, almost contradictory to that, is you also need to have a large online presence, right? Through social media and LinkedIn. LinkedIn's huge, right? Having a profile on LinkedIn, and people kind of seeing you being active there, translates into the real world, right? And so makes it easier to have these physical relationships in the real world, which are kind of backed by what you're doing in the digital world, through kind of these types of social media. And I think if you're talking about practical kind of ways of getting in, pilots are really good way of understanding the market, kind of dipping your toe in, but make sure they're paid pilots. So in the region, people are not averse to paying for pilots. It's kind of become a normal thing, and paid pilots do a number of things, right? They mean that there's a bit of skin in the game, and so even if you have to go and apply for a couple of $1,000s of money, someone's going to ask you what was it used for and what was the outcomes, right? So there's a focus on there. So people don't just do pilots and then not use it because they're free. There's nothing to lose. The other thing that helps you to do is it helps you to understand the approval mechanisms, and who the commercial team is and all of that. So you build, you like almost by stealth, you build an idea of how the organization works. And so hopefully when your pilot is successful and then you turn it into a full-blown implementation, that element of things isn't an issue, right? And in this part of the world, it can sometimes be as hard to navigate the commercial and payment mechanisms as it is to win the client in the first place. Just
Mm,
just because of the bureaucracy and the number of people that need to have signatures, and even when they're digitized, they're kind of digitized an existing paper-based archaic system, right? They're not taking the opportunity to optimize the workflows and the processes as they digitize. So I guess, yeah, and I guess there's lots of different ways. If you're looking at, if you can only go to one place in the region, my advice right now is probably to look at Saudi Arabia. I know there's been a whole bunch of stuff in the press about projects being downsized and things like that, but
yeah,
that downsizing is, don't forget, is happening from such a high base, right? So if you're downsizing from something that's so big, you still got a pretty big market to
big
be able to
market.
go after.
Yeah. Okay.
And they're going to be delivering the World Cup in 2036. They've got
Mm,
the Expo in 2030. They've got, yeah, there's a whole bunch of stuff happening. Trojana's hosting the Asian Winter Olympics in 2027 or something like that. So there's a bunch of projects that are public facing that have to get finished, and those are massive in their own right.
awesome. Yeah, I mean, everyone I think has their eyes on Saudi in some way or the other. Now, the only question that comes, and this is something even I've, questioned myself, is how do you make that first contact? Establishing relationships and being on ground is definitely important, but how do you make that first contact to be able to, because for startups, they're already bootstrapped, right? They have limited funds, they have limited resources. So what's your advice on how do we make that first contact in the Middle East market so that you can then start networking, you can start making, relationships, as you said, and hopefully get pilots and grow from there.
I guess it's probably not that dissimilar to what happens in India, right? It's using your network or the network of your network. And like I mentioned before, like LinkedIn is really big, and people are generally approachable. And so if you reach out to people on LinkedIn and things like that, most people, if it's something in the area that as long as you're not trying to sell them software developer services or trying to get them to sign up to PMP courses or something like that, most of them will respond, right? And start engaging. I think that's one area. There's a number of events that happen that are focused on construction technology. That's a good way to meet people and kind of get into the ecosystem here. And it's a concentrated kind of thing, right? It's getting to a place, it's getting to a stage where it's the same people attending every single event, and so like it's starting to feel a little bit stale from that perspective. But people still attend, right? That's where people want to be seen. That's where you can catch up with other people in the ecosystem. So that's a great way to kind of boost your network.
Mhm. So what are some of the top 2, 3 events that you say that, these are the must be at events, or you should, make your space, time, and resources and get to these places, because this is where you get a good section of people to talk to.
Yeah, so there's the one in particular is the Construction Technology Festival. So they have one in Dubai. I think that one's already gone, and then they have another one in September in KSA. Those are really well regarded, really well attended. And what I like about them is that they're attended by a real cross section of the ecosystem. So you get large industry players, the traditional construction consultants and contractors and developers. You get the startups, you get academia, so some of the universities, and then you get government. So you get the kind of four different elements, and they're also starting to attract investors as well, right? So you get this kind of full ecosystem of people, and again, really concentrated, right? Everyone's kind of there at the same time. Then there's another event that happens towards December. It's part of a trade show called the Big Five. Some of you
Mhm.
might have heard of it.
Yeah, yeah.
One of the days is dedicated to called the future tech construction, and so that it's like a day of panel shows and stuff like that. But even as part of Big Five, there are like they have a startup city, and then there's an innovation village there and things like that. So those are probably the two kind of big ones, and then there's lots of kind of small ones that happen sometimes ad hoc, but slightly smaller ones.
Fair, fair. So, getting a little more deeper into, finding partnerships and all. So, how critical do you think is local partnerships or, local presence? I mean, you already kind of touched upon it fairly, but to gain traction in the Middle East, is it possible for some startups to remotely create that relationship, or do you think it has to be on the ground? There has to be a physical handshake to be able to do that?
I think you can start with remote relationships and start building some of them. Like I said, doing it via digital means. But yeah, in order for it to kind of flourish and mature, I think you have to have that physical presence, right? And be in and look at the whites of someone's eyes and get that sense of trust and things like that. And again, I wouldn't imagine it's that much different to India as well, right? Like I can imagine, some of the cultural norms are quite similar to between India and the Middle East. And there's obviously a large Indian presence in the Middle East, and that has an influence on business culture here. So I think that's one element. Local partners, if you're talking about, for incorporation and having to have a local partner, that's
Mhm.
pretty much diminished now. So you used to have to set up in free zones if you wanted 100% ownership of your business, and that came with certain perks and a few restrictions. But that has broadly now gone away. And so you can get what's called an onshore business license now. And that gives you 100% ownership in certain different jurisdictions. And then there's a whole bunch of kind of incentive programs across the region. The UAE sees startups as a massive driver for economic growth going forward. I think I can't remember what the statistic is. I think they want 20% of the economy to be coming from small and medium-sized enterprises by 2040 or something like that. So there's a big onus and incentive programs to, subsidize licensing fees, giving you subsidized rent and things like that. Similarly, in Saudi Arabia, there's a big program there. I keep getting this acronym mixed up. NDTP or NTDP is one or the other. They actually they've got a ConTech focused program to attract startups. They'll fund part of your pilot costs. They'll fund your first hires or partially fund your first hires if they're Saudi nationals. They'll give you discounted setup costs and all of that stuff. So there's a bunch of programs that make
Interesting.
it accessible to come into the region.
Interesting. Interesting. These are some very good nuggets. I think a lot of people would be appreciating, and definitely, that acronym that you just mentioned, if you could just share maybe later after the call,
Yeah, I'll put
would
it
be
into the
happy to.
group.
Absolutely happy to. And so now again, since you talk about relationships, and relationships are very sensitive. So what are some common things that startups should keep in mind when approaching a client in the area? For example, there are certain cultural things that are there. There are certain nuances that are there for every market. So what difference do you see, or what kind of things that to dos that you should do or keep in mind while approaching a client in the Middle East market?
I guess one thing I've learned recently, oh, not recently, but one thing I've learned that's very different is if you're interacting with females, don't offer your hand to shake because most of them are not allowed to touch males, right? And so that can be sometimes awkward. You put your hand out and they move back, and then you instantly kind of disillusion yourself with that. And we're starting to see a lot more female participation in construction projects and in like general life in the region as well, particularly in Saudi Arabia where it wasn't before. I guess the big thing is that people like to kind of have that face-to-face interaction, right? And so wherever you can, try and meet people. There's this big culture of informally meeting. Obviously, there's not a drinking culture here, but people meet over things like shisha or a coffee. There's a big coffee culture, and there's so many coffee shops because of that. So that I think in that informal setting, but talking about work, I think that's really important to build relationships. And then in terms of like the business and actually like pitching your startup and things like that is knowing what the company's pain points are and how you can potentially help solve them. I think that is a huge thing, right? It makes them feel like you've done some research on them, you know them, and that you've got an ask, right? That you're not just there to as a fishing expedition, or just you're there just to find out what's going on. There's something tangible that you can get out of it. So know your ask. But again, don't think that that's any different to other parts of the world.
Right, right. No, I mean that's absolutely correct. Understanding your customer is the first thing that you would want to do to gain their trust, and then that's when the conversation kind of moves forward, 100%. So, and now on the flip side, what major? I mean, you might have seen a lot of startups come, because it's a dreamland for a lot of people, again because of these large scale projects. What are some common mistakes that you have seen, startups make when they enter this market? It could be, based on your experience, what have you seen that startups typically make a common mistake and then they have a sour taste and they return?
So I think one of the big things is focusing on customer success. So after you've landed a customer, I think as startups, a lot of startups think that the hard work is winning the customer, is actually delivering and retaining them. In my opinion, now you've seen kind of some of the startups that have struggled or are struggling is they didn't invest enough in that element of it, and particularly in construction and construction technology. I think we get driven as construction technology companies by traditional VCs to see services as a dirty word, right? The professional services or the implementation element of what we do is kind of frowned upon and doesn't have the same weight as the licensing fee and the SaaS fee. And I think that's driven a psyche within construction technology to not look at that or place less importance on it. I'm actually the opposite. I think that our product, the service element, is part of our SaaS product, right? And we're an industry that builds, designs tangible things, right? Like everything that we work on, we can touch, feel, see. And so why wouldn't the psychology of everything we buy be anchored to that? And so, it's really, really difficult to abstractly buy a piece of software and then never see a person, right? It doesn't happen. It's very rare in construction. You might do it for, Word or Excel or Zoom or something like that. These kind of commoditized elements, but not for things that you're going to be using to deliver your assets. And so I think where I've seen companies fail, and again, I can imagine that this is applicable everywhere, but it's probably acutely applicable here in the Middle East, is have don't be scared to have a services element to your business because that's what's going to set you up for success.
Nice. Interesting. Yeah, I think that the customer success is definitely something I see a lot of large companies investing heavily on. So I think that's the learning that they also have had, because technology looks very fancy, but until it is implemented correctly, it does not give you the ROI that you're looking for. Awesome. So coming onto the sales cycle, because my personal experience, a typical sales cycle and then revenue. In India also, it takes quite a while for a decision maker to make that decision and then convert it into a sale. What's the typical sales cycle you have seen in your experience if you were approaching a fresh customer versus an existing customer? Because I think there is a difference. Once you are in with the customer in a good relationship, then sales cycles, I think, improve. So what's your experience been? What should the
So
startups look ahead? I mean, look forward to, because they all come with dreamy eyes and then they take that as a shocker and then they move back. So what's
they're
your
long. They're really long. They're really long. I don't know if they're longer or shorter than other parts of the world, but they're long. So look, if you're going through an RFP process, a request for proposal process, so someone, and this happens quite a bit, is that they'll put out a proposal for, a system for this, or a project management information system, or a safety management system, or a electronic document management system. That process probably going to take 6 to 9 months, right, for them to put the bid out, get them back, do post-tender clarifications, do interviews. Then we have this whole concept of the same as they have. They kind of apply the same concept to software procurement as they do for your concrete supplier or your steel supplier. You'll go to a BAFO and a LAFO and a LELA LAFO, and like there's this basically sets of discounting that you need to do to be able to win it, right? So for those that don't know, a BAFO is your best and final offer, then it's your last and final offer, and then it's your last final offer. Like it goes, there's stages of it. So that's kind of 6 to 9 months, and that's because there's already a client will, right? They know what they want. They packaged it up to a document that you're responding to. So they've got a set criteria, they've got a set timeline where they need it. And so that's probably, your quickest bet. If you're going to be prospecting somebody and they haven't even thought about like, purchasing your item, or they're not looking for it, but then you've tweaked their interest or whatever, that can take 18 months. So like with some of our customers that we've been talking to for 14 months in terms of positioning, and it kind of goes in cycles, and you have to do demos to about 10,000 people in the organization. You have to jump through the same amount of hoops. And so that can take a long time. I think the quickest we've ever closed is probably 4 months. And that was, we had really strong relationships with them personally and from, our network, and we worked with them before. The project that they were going to be starting was starting imminently, so they needed to go ahead. Really, they needed to get something on board really, really quickly. They had the power and the budget to be able to make the decision, and so it moved really, really quickly. So I guess, yeah, it all depends on the type of engagement that you have, the relationships that we have, and then the circumstances that which you come to the sale.
Mhm. And what about payments?
Payments, look, I think there's a notion that it's difficult to get paid here. Uh, touch wood, so far we haven't had that bigger issue
Mm.
with getting payments made. But I think it's the same as the sales cycle, right? If you build the right relationships with the right people within these organizations, and I touched on it before about, paid pilots, right?
Yeah.
That helps you start navigating the business and working out which desk or whose approval that you need to get stuff. If you can do that work upfront and navigate that, then that really helps. Generally, the consensus here is that if people aren't getting paid, then the project's going to get slowed down, and so that flow of money is generally okay, particularly for software. So there's obviously we suffer from the traditional, subcontractor deep supply chain issues where someone's delivered something, but because the main contractor is delayed because of something else, that person doesn't get paid, and it kind of gums up the system, right? With software, it's slightly different. Because you can switch it off, right? And so there's that almost that fear. A lot of it you can get paid up front. So we try to do payment terms where we get 12 months paid up front, where we can. And so from a software perspective, getting paid is probably not as challenging as traditional construction. I'm not saying it's brilliant. I'm not saying that there's no problems here at all. But if I'm telling you my personal experience, whether it's by luck or through the relationships that we've built, it's been okay so far.
Interesting. I think construction tech all over the world has a very similar touch and feel with some plus minus buffers everywhere. Even here when you approach a customer to converting that sale, be it consulting, be it product, be it a software. I mean, the fastest I've heard is a week or so, and that was when the customer was actually aggressively looking for a solution. And the slowest I have heard is, like you said, 14, 16, 18 months, and you're still chasing that customer.
Yeah.
So, and same with the payments. I mean, payments typically, again, touch wood from my side also, I've seen startups who get paid in time. And a lot of them are also factoring that same proposal of, taking some fee upfront so that that covers their base at least. But yeah, I mean, very interesting. So folks, you can also drop in your questions that you have. So we'll open up for questions in another 2-3 minutes. I just want to kind of start wrapping up. So what is the latest buzzword or latest buzz technology that you hear a lot in the Middle Eastern market? Because that you see, I mean, of course AI, but if you go a little deeper, what's some themes that you're seeing right now which is very hot? Sustainability, AI, or what is
So
it?
I think automation just generally, and AI kind of comes under that. That's a big element of it. We're seeing a lot of reality capture, right? So there's a lot of onus now on reality capture, and that falls into 360 cameras, laser scanning, photogrammetry, right? The kind of that whole spectrum falls under that. That's starting to really take hold now. Whether that's doing it with things like open space on 360 cameras on helmets, or attaching things onto drones and for the non-linear projects and stuff like that, or actually traditional laser scanning to get both before a project starts to see as built, but then also monitoring progress as you go. That's kind of a big thing. Data and data analysis. So I mentioned Power BI, dynamic dashboards. That's a big thing, and it's becoming almost business as usual now, right? As in almost all the large players, the top end of medium and the large players, they're kind of getting their data strategies together, creating their own data lakes, and then hiring data scientists, right? So that's a big trend we're seeing now. A lot of organizations are hiring like non-traditional construction people into their organization. So there's not ConTech. This is traditional construction companies hiring AI, ML, and data scientists directly on their books. Even if it's not to work on their own things, it's to crunch the data to produce these dynamic dashboards.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I was about to ask that question on data lakes, and because there are a lot of tools that are there, but a lot of tools don't talk to each other. So that's a typical problem statement that I've seen, but I'm very surprised or pleasantly surprised to see that people are actually acknowledging that fact and they are onboarding these kind of technology people onto their payrolls to be able to solve for these problems. That's very,
Yeah.
very interesting. And now talking a little bit about smart money in the market, because people here would also be looking for opportunities to maybe incubate, accelerate, or even raise funds in the Middle East. So where is the smart money right now going in the Middle East in terms of context? But further to talk, what are the themes that are attracting a lot of smart money in the market?
So anything that helps with productivity and productivity monitoring, that seems to be getting a lot of traction. Um, uh, automating certain business processes, that seems to be getting quite a lot of traction. And interestingly, I was speaking to a VC just yesterday, um, uh, and his IC, his investment committee, is basically saying that they've got contact fatigue. They've done so many contact investments, they don't want to take any more. And my initial reaction was, oh, that's disappointing. But actually, that's a good sign, right? That means
Yeah,
that contact is starting to penetrate into traditional capital flows. And so it was really interesting that having this conversation with him. That I think they've done three. The last three just so happened that were contact, and they're not a contact specialist. They're a broad-based Saudi-based VC, but they've been investing just by accident, right? They've done a lot of contact investing. So I think those are the areas that kind of are attracting the kind of most uh, amount of capital. And then prop tech, which depending on your perspective, right? Context a subset of prop tech, or prop tech is completely separate. Like depending on what you do, prop tech's big, right? A lot of kind of real estate focused, because the Dubai real estate market is so hot, there's a
Mhm.
whole bunch of money going in there. How to analyze the market, how to attract the buyers and join up to the sellers, and even operating of the assets once they've been sold and things like that. So there's a big focus on prop tech, and I guess we as ConTech, as it's kind of sometimes ugly cousin, we're getting some of the halo effect of that.
Very interesting, very interesting. And what about sustainability? Because that's now, I think, the global theme. I see a lot of funds in India also very actively pursuing sustainability. So is
Yeah.
that the theme as well? And
Yeah, I
what?
think so. But it's not. I'm not seeing. I personally, it might be in other things, but in the areas that I've personally kind of been involved in and seeing, there are some funds that are basically dedicating their funds to sustainability, environmental technologies and things like that. But I wouldn't say that that's an overriding theme. There has been a shift away from like Web3 and some of these as that's died down. Fintech is a big one. The UAE in particular wants to be a hub for financial technologies, and so there's a lot of money flowing into fintech, and that's a traditional kind of sexy tech, right? That attracts a lot of capital anyway.
Yeah, I mean, that's money right there, right? Money is what you're managing. So of course, money attracts money.
Yeah.
That's definitely going to be there. Very interesting. So anyone has any questions, please feel free to, jump in and ask. Till anyone comes up, just to kind of start, winding down. So what's your view for the next 5 years in the Middle East market? I know you mentioned a lot of cool projects coming up and a lot of work coming up, but in terms of technology, in terms of technology adoption, what are you seeing for the next 5 years in the Middle East market?
So I think we're going to start seeing the evolution of AI. We started it, in what 2022 with Gen AI. Then it kind of evolved into RAG, and becoming more specific. And now everyone's talking about agentic AI, making really specific agents that are then coordinated with an orchestration agent. And then we're starting to see this whole MCP, model context protocols, where instead of agents giving you information from previous, they actually start doing things, right? They start connecting, and you start getting to real automation. So I think depending if we can sort some of the security issues out with MCP and things like that, that's probably a direction of travel where you're going to start seeing more autonomous AI agents and AI kind of doing things rather than just telling you what to do or advising you on what to do. Um, and kind of slightly contradicting what I was saying before, but I think the kind of the environmental aspect of construction, the green technology, particularly in this part of the world, I think you're going to start seeing more of, right? So NEOM, for example, has just launched or is about to open the largest green hydrogen plant in the world. So looking at how hydrogen can be utilized as a form of energy and things like that, where you're starting to see, particularly again in the UAE and Dubai, we're starting to get to the end of the design life of buildings. So if you imagine, Dubai really started taking off probably 50 years ago in terms of the early buildings. Those are coming to the end of the design lives. And so now there's a decision to be made about, do you knock it down? Do you repurpose it, bring it up to fire standards, bring it up to the latest, energy standards? And that is going to drive technology, I think, right? Technology from, what do you put in there, what sensors you put in, how do you change the air conditioning units, and the thickness of the walls, and all of this stuff, and how you can either retrospectively add technology to help bring it up to standard, or in the new build, what technologies you put in. So the things associated with that. And then I think the last couple of years, digital twins have kind of
Yeah.
like been a big topic, and then it's kind of petered out as AI took over. But I see that there's still that underlying current, right, where you take BIM models and start doing more with them, right? Start utilizing them to give connecting them to IoT and real life data during construction, and then 100% looking at doing that through the operational phase of an asset.
Yeah, even in India, I think redevelopment is a big theme in Mumbai right now. There have been quite a few conferences in that space, so I can completely relate to that. So one of the questions that is coming in is, what is the trend in the Middle East? Do you see a lot of point solutions or single integrated platforms? What is the choice for a customer?
We're seeing lots of point solutions, and this is a challenge for us as an industry, right? I think my take on this is that we should try and work together as context startups and try and make sure that we're presenting a unified front, right? You like even think about the other way around, right? You don't want to have multiple different logins for different things if they're doing similar kind of elements of it, right? And so coming together in a unified one, that doesn't mean that you've got to have a single platform that does everything. I think you just have to make sure that there's interoperability and that they're talking to each other, and that you're maximizing the use of the data that you're collecting, right? So if someone's collecting data for progress, then can it be used to also look at it from a safety perspective or a risk perspective, or a commercial perspective? And so looking at how we can do more, but you might be like, we might like us, we're specialized in safety, but what else can we do with that safety data, right? Can we help it inform design? Can we help it inform the commercial team? Like is like looking at things like that, and there might be another startup or another product that's really specialized in that. And so looking at those integrations. So that's one thing that I'm trying to do more of, and help the industry. And then you've got platforms like Procore, right? And their marketplace, I think, is probably one of their biggest weapons that they underutilize, right? That they can provide a unified front to a construction company, but anything that it needs to be used to plug gaps, they've got this marketplace that they can attract startups to be able to do. I just think that it's not like being effectively rolled out. Things like that, I think, is what we're going to see more of going forward, right? Autodesk have now started to kind of make their platform a lot more open, whereas traditionally they had a walled garden. And so I think we're going to start seeing more of that.
Very interesting. We need our own MCP is what you're pointing at. Okay, and you also mentioned about integration. So there's a question on, is there a business case for integration as a service in the Middle East market? Or is
So
it
what,
something that startup should?
like Zapier and that type of model, is that what you're talking about? Like like offering
No, I think
building
it's
one.
more on the implement. So basically, like you mentioned, there are interconnectivity that you
Yes.
need for tools. There also needs to be someone who helps implementation, because
Yeah. No,
every startup has.
Yeah, that market already exists. There's a couple of players here. They don't build their own software, but they're almost like a value-added reseller, almost, but very specific to construction tech. And so they'll do deals with software companies, and then provide the implementation, training, support layer. Yeah, I think there's definitely room for that in the market, and that helps with the point solution kind of conversation as well. So a lot of these, although they don't build software, they'll build middle layer. They build the middle
Yeah.
layer kind of connectors, right? That
Yes.
um, potentially provides a unified front, even if it's just the dashboard. So they'll help collect data from multiple point solutions, but the thing that the customer sees or ultimately cares about is, your Power BI dashboard or a centralized dashboard. And so yeah, I'm seeing a couple of players in the market like that already, and some of them are uber successful.
Very nice. Very interesting. And there's another question on, the drone tech. So what's the current regarding drone tech? I know you touched upon it, but if you can specifically focus on drones and its utilization in the Middle East market.
Yeah, it's been a while since I was involved in kind of things to do with drones. I'm just starting to see it, but certainly utilizing them for progress monitoring. I'm seeing a lot of that. A lot of these large scale programs are regularly flying drones to take imagery of their programs and developments. Sometimes for marketing material. So you've seen lots of stuff on Neom, right, coming out when flying over, the foundations that are happening on the line and things like that. That type of stuff is also happening on the smaller scale projects. But in
Okay.
terms of what the actual technology, where it's moved to, like, to be honest, yeah, I don't know, like when I was looking at it, DGI seemed to be the front runner, but I'm assuming it's moved along a lot since then.
Mhm. And this is a question from me. Is WhatsApp still the largest project management tool, even in the Middle East market?
This WhatsApp is the most successful construction technology ever built that nobody talks about.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's where everyone is trying to now plug in gradually to be able to, pull that. I think your solution also offers WhatsApp interface where you can query with WhatsApp, right?
Look, the way that we see it is we've built our own app, which has got
Yeah.
conversational interfaces in it, right? And it's great. But we also are not naive to think that we're gonna force a whole cohort of people who use WhatsApp every single day already to exchange the type of information that we want to carry to switch over to our app. So the way that we've kind of approached it is go to where your customer is, right? Minimize the friction to adoption and then slowly bring them over, right? So we do things like deep links and send them notifications. So whenever it's absolutely necessary for them to come into our application, we will bring them there. But otherwise, like what's wrong with WhatsApp, right? As in, and I guess the challenge with WhatsApp is organizations have a mistrust of it because they see it as a public tool and it's not enterprise grade or whatever. But actually, it's end-to-end encrypted.
Yeah.
So no one, even WhatsApp can't see what's happening in between. And so that means that an organization doesn't have visibility of what's happening inside the WhatsApp group. And then the other big common thing I hear here is that it's unstructured. It's messy, it's hard to follow a track, and I have 1,000 messages every day. I don't know what's going on. AI can solve both of those issues for you, right?
Yeah.
You use it to extract what you need and to structure that information so then you can make decisions off of it. So look, again, there's always a challenge with IT and governance about using WhatsApp, but we're integrating into Teams, right? So Teams is again probably on most people's phones now because they use it for their own internal communications and that. And the approach we're taking is whatever interface you as a user are comfortable using will come to you and get the technology to do the work, right? And that's what really good technology should be doing, right? It shouldn't be making your life harder. It should be actually making it easier.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Go where your customer is, right? Awesome. So just to kind of close off, what's the last kind of words that you would like to put out about the startups that are looking to enter into the Middle East market? What's your final take?
So my biggest advice to them is come. You like come and be on the ground, see it, feel it, talk to people, right? I think no matter what I say to you, or what you read about, what you see on YouTube or wherever you're getting your primary research from, there's nothing like or nothing will replace actually coming here and being on the ground. Meeting potential customers, going to construction companies and construction sites, and you'll find most of them are quite accessible, right? People won't be stopping you or blindly just saying no. If you've got, like I said, you've got a good ask and you're coming there well knowledgeable about what they do and how they do it. That's the biggest thing I think is basically come.
Awesome, awesome. Thanks a lot, Prakash. I thoroughly enjoyed the session. I got very interesting perspectives also to the market. So thanks a lot for being candid and being completely transparent and sharing all your experiences. Really
No
appreciate
worries.
it.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for joining.
Bye bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.